Good day, listener. Thank you for tuning into Team 2. My name is Corey Anderson.
My name is Catherine Kang.
My name is Rita Mazorazi.
My name is Royan Rong.
My name is Chaoran Zhang. You can call me Chao.
And for this assignment, we are Team Tiger. Today we will be talking to you about the Swiss Sustainability Framework, modeled using the Sustainability Assessment in Switzerland, from theory to practice document developed by the Federal Office for Spatial Development in Switzerland back in 2005. If you are currently finding yourself wondering, doesn't that seem a little old? Do not worry. The Swiss Federal Council is currently in the midst of developing an updated framework that will fall in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that was adopted by the United Nations. Furthermore, this framework has already gained notable traction in policies that were implemented in 2011. Moving aside, we will spend the next 29 and a half minutes discussing this framework in 5 different sections, including an overview, identifying the tools used throughout the framework, an in-depth critique, a SWOT analysis, and give some recommendations based on our research conducted by our team. To get right into it, as previously mentioned, the Sustainability Framework was developed back in 2005 after Switzerland declared sustainability as a national objective. The purpose of this framework was initially developed for evaluating and optimizing sustainability throughout Switzerland's industries. Although this document focuses specifically on the transportation and agriculture sectors. The goal of this framework is to achieve both sustainable and equal development within the target dimensions of the economy, society, and the environment, while maintaining a semblance of cross-generational fairness. Although a vote was held making the assessment not mandatory for private industry to use the sustainability framework, it is strongly encouraged and will be reevaluated once the pilot projects are complete. Immediate key takeaways included the acknowledgement that there must be trade-offs, more transparency, more government oversight, and that political action not be isolated and allow for interplay between the environment, economy, and society. With that, let's hear from Catherine about the tools that are used throughout this assessment. Catherine?
Thank you, Corey. I will spend the next few minutes talking about the tools that are used throughout the framework, starting with who developed it. As Corey mentioned, back in 2005, the Federal Office for Spatial Development coordinated the Sustainable Development Policy in Switzerland. The developer and the head of Sustainable Development section was Daniel Wecker. He developed a conceptual framework and basic methodology for conducting sustainability assessment at the federal level to implement throughout Switzerland. The conceptual framework was developed to be modified to meet a need specific to different policy areas. The aim of the Sustainability Assessment Framework is to strengthen the role of sustainable development by making it an integral and cross-sectoral part of policy planning and decision-making. The Sustainability Assessment Framework evaluates the social, economic, and environmental ramifications of the federal government's projects and activities at the strategy, planning, and program level. The main goal of the framework is to create transparency through an understandable and integral evaluation of each project's impact on society, the economy, and of course the environment. Ideally, it will be used to develop suggestions for improvement and optimization. So let's discuss what tools make up the framework. The first step of creating a sustainability assessment framework is to establish a project's sustainability relevance. The next step is to establish an impact analysis, which evaluates a project's impact on the 3 sustainability dimensions. The methods to be used for the impact analysis are defined according to the context of the situation and use specific criteria to determine a project's impact. Finally, a report is developed documenting possibilities that would allow for maximum optimization, and is offered for decision makers. Two different projects to establish benchmarks. First, they applied the framework to the programs section of the sectoral transport plan. Later on, they applied it to the agriculture policy, a future stage of Swiss agriculture policy reform that is in line with World Trade Organization specifications. And talk about how they are used. The first they used for the sectoral transport plan. In the 2005 sectoral transport plan was central tool for transport infrastructure planning and development. The sustainability assessment evaluates the goals of the transport policy, its strategic focal points, and the planning objectives. Governing the future implication of the sectoral transport plan. According to the context of the situation, a number of project-specific modifications have been made to sustainability assessment conceptual framework. For example, and this project's sustainability relevance was established by the Interdepartmental Rail Committee. The relevance check consisted of the 27 evaluation criteria of Interdepartmental Rail Committee, which is used to determine necessity for sustainability within a specific industry or sector. Another analysis used within the framework is the impact analysis. As the name implies, the impact analysis was based on the 27 ideal rail criteria and on transport-specific criteria developed for the sectoral plan. The core of the sustainability assessment was formed by an analysis of the project's impact, conflicts, and consistency. The evaluation focuses on optimization. The focuses specifically on the goals and individual strategies which are meant to refine the implementation measure identified within the framework and the previous laid out criteria. And then let Corey tell us how this conceptual work on the agriculture policy.
Thank you, Catherine. The Federal Office for Agriculture, or FOAG, has used the sustainability assessment methodology to evaluate what was their upcoming policy for 2011 to allow for further reform in accordance with the assessment. After implementing the framework, a number of changes occurred, including a new annual sustainability report to assist with monitoring future development and ex-ante evaluation and optimization of future agrarian reforms. The FOAG also modified criteria to better adapt to industry-specific needs, including changes to capital and resources, by substituting non-renewable resources with renewable ones, changing inefficiency by changing power inputs and outputs at all levels of production, which are expected to make either a positive or neutral change from a sustainability perspective. Moreover, economic indicators such as labor productivity and capital regeneration are likely to improve, although negative trends are emerging on arable land, which as most note as crucial to agriculture. The changes are also expected to have negative impact on income development, but increase overall satisfaction. With all that in mind, we will now hear from Rudo with research-supported critiques of the framework. Rudo?
Thank you, Corey. I'm going to criticize the tools used for this framework. According to Flint 2013, for a sustainable framework to be effective, people, planet, and profit should be considered. Looking at this framework as stated by Catherine, my colleague Catherine, they categorize the main focus area into 3 criteria, which are environment, economy, and society. Furthermore, they went on to specifically categorize the main areas they want to tackle so that will not enable them to improve or solve the messy problems, but also give them the ability to measure success. Although the cost for implementation for this framework is high, considering that the framework is targeting two sections, which are agriculture and transport. Also, a project management team was created so that they will closely analyze the process of implicating this framework and quickly adjust according to the negative impacts that will be encountered. They will also consider not only the impact analysis, but also the relevance analysis for the framework assessment. That will lead to the last point being the framework is flexible to the changes that will be encountered. They give room for adjustment or corrections on the framework if there is need. And my colleague Chow will give us the SWOT analysis. Chow.
Thank you, Rudolph. That was a good critique. Now I will also use SWOT as one of our main tools to examine this framework. First, let's discuss strengths. It covers three important dimensions: economy, environment, and society. Although it is common that policies take account of each of the big three, some still do not. This multidimensional process is associated with trade-offs, which must produce more transparency in accordance with the concept of sustainable development. One of the main goals of a sustainable assessment is to prepare and present these trade-offs with transparency for policymakers. Another strength is the framework is able to communicate the significance of complete life cycle for products and industries for businesses. It allows them to take into consideration issues further down the value chain. In this sense, the tool can be seen to increase the understanding of life cycle perspective. The final strength, all participants in the case studies attested to the great benefits of the sustainability assessment in regard of information processing, added transparency, and ensuring a project's consistency with sustainability criteria. This in itself can be a major contribution to improving the project and to making it more sustainable. Now, let's go to the weaknesses. As Rudolph had previously mentioned, the framework is both time-consuming and restrictive. Weaknesses cannot be ignored. Also, the framework has been shown to have negative impact on both financial and economic policy when put in place. This is likely due to the fact that the framework in its current state tends to consume more time and require specialized knowledge. Since two case studies are both pilot projects, they cannot necessarily speak for all future projects when the framework is implemented. Both case studies show the value of an incremental approach, while the three-phase application of the sectoral transport plan optimizes its effectiveness. The same thing is achieved in the case of agriculture policy by integrating the assessment into the reconciling with established monitoring and reporting systems of the Swiss agriculture policy. Because of the underdevelopment, the results show that the framework is likely to work differently in different sectors. In short, the framework can be considered isolated, which are neither very sensible nor very effective. However, it still has the chances to improve. It is an ongoing process. This was designed back in 2004 and implemented in 2005. The framework has been further developed as it offered many opportunities to those working on it. For example, it's easy to monitor as it has already been implemented on two different industries like the transportation and agriculture. It's largely modifiable, and its generic design allows it to be used in other industries as they begin to adopt more sustainable practices. It's the use of bottom-up approach will work as a platform for future dialogue with communities across the countries and create an impact on future design. Last but not least, the framework has several threats must be addressed. First, as pilot project has been pointed out, the framework can be very demanding in terms of time, money, and implementation. Second, the pilot sustainability assessments have shown that demanding on their subject. Sustainability assessment can be very limited in the particular area. The specialized knowledge is particularly important in cases where the consequences of the measures and conflicts must be established. Now, it goes to Rudolf.
Thank you, Chao. Looking at Switzerland's sustainable framework, I'm going to critically analyze it using the SMART analysis as suggested by scholars like Ratnayakar et al. 2015 and Meyer 2012. The main goal for this framework is to balance the nature and its capability to renew itself and its use by man. So the framework is very specific on what they really want to do. According to Ratnayakar 2015, they stated that a framework to be effective, they need to have the specific goal on what they really want to do and achieve. It is safe to say Switzerland's sustainable framework states their main aim and specifically provided the sections they want to change. Measurable. A set of questions were set aside so that they can be able to distinguish the effectiveness of the framework. 3 questions were set aside. Question 1. To what extent does the action steps will comply with the Sustainable Development Goals which were mapped out in the Swiss Federal Council? The second question is if the project can complete the 3 sustainable dimensions which are environment, economy, and society. Question 3 is to what extent does the project is consistency with meeting the goals and strategies that were set aside? These are the main questions that we use to ensure the effectiveness of the strategy. Answering each question and every question will support the fact that the framework is measurable. Although they can be able to measure the success if they effectively make the framework to be mandatory to all the local stakeholders. That will give them enough room to measure success. The last question being to what extent sustainability objectives are met in future with the use of specialized knowledge. Acquiring specialized knowledge will lead to the framework being expensive and a difficulty to implement. But that is not the only criteria that should be met to critically state that the framework is effective. Measurably will be a difficulty because the objectives lack consistency and are too broad. Achievable. The framework steps or action steps, they are considered to make Switzerland a country that focuses on nature if it can renew itself and consider people using it. On transport plan, they developed a program which will focus on 3 sectors. On environmental sector, they are looking at air and noise pollution, soil, water and landscape, climate and energy. On economic sector, their main focus are on accessibility to tourist regions, European regions within the Swiss city system, and the capacity of bottlenecks. On society, their main focus is accessibility to rural population, traffic safety, quality of life in residential development, and the improving the quality of infrastructure for non-motorized traffic and transfers. Critically analyzing these aims, they are very much achievable if they can encourage the local community to work together, which is what they did not implement on this framework. They specifically stated the points they want to focus their project on. On agriculture, they are focusing on the ability to improve the economy by renewal capital, land quantity, labor productivity development, and international comparison of land productivity. Management of impacts on aquatic ecological toxicity, threats of erosion, phosphorus contents in the soil, potential for nitrogen emission, and energy efficiency. On society, they are aiming to improve the status of education and income comparison among the local population and the quality of life. Although these tapes will implicate a high value expense, that will be a weakness on the framework as mentioned by my colleague Charles. Although it has room for flexibility, the expensive value will still be a weakness. So expense and lack of community collaboration will raise a challenge on the framework to be achievable. Realistic. Sustainable assessment is considered realistic if they are aware of the negative impacts that will be as a result of, and that will determine the unrealistic side of the framework. Some of the facts they outlined include the framework is violating minimum impacts on social, economic, and environment. Also, they considered the negative consequences that can arise and can be reversed with a difficulty or an impossible application at all. The negative consequences of the framework will affect the future generations or not. Also, the framework will not be realistic if there is uncertainty on the impacts, either positive or negative. Although it is safe to say, negative impacts cannot be ruled out. Also, the last fact is the framework of sustainability inflicted negative impacts on the areas that are already affected by sustainability problems, or worsen the situation. In other words, it will bring wicked and messy problems. Looking at these facts that they are implying, I could critically analyze that this framework is realistic because they put in place a relevance and impact analysis, so that will enable them to manage and process the implication of this framework. Timeline. For an effective or applicable framework, timeline should be a consideration. The Swift Sustainable Framework considered the fact of time, and they decided that they will consider other strategies that have been put in place in 2004 and are still in effect. So they considered this framework to be implemented by 2011, and this framework was set up in 2005. Looking at their main goals, according to Hamiti and Wadler 2014, sustainability in Switzerland is considered serious. That is why they're encouraging the local lecturers or teachers to share their knowledge in sustainability so that they can improve on sustainable factors. So that shows there is still progress, although it is time consuming and the objectives that were set up were pretty much too simple. In conclusion, after the critical analysis of the sustainable framework, it is concluded that this framework will be very effective if they consider the recommendations that will be stated by my colleague Royan.
Thank you, Rudolph. First of all, the Swiss Sustainability Assessment Framework needs to determine the common standard, which is a cross-sectoral standard. The research recommends Swiss Sustainability Framework reducing raw material consumption. Secondly, in order to enable future development, and as Charles mentioned about the evaluation procedure of sustainability assessment, which require high cost in terms of time and budget, we suggest that the assessment framework to implement a cost-effective approach to supervise it. Also, they need to work on applying for the subsidy from the government. Thirdly, it is necessary to promote the framework and facilitate more discussion. Some best practice recommended that they should hire a sustainability coordinator. In addition, some approaches should be extended within the policy sectors of transport and agriculture, where they are already applied. The conditions for such an extension are good, since in both sectors legal angles are under development or exist already. We recommended Swiss sustainability framework to offer incentives system and implement some regulation for enforcement. Besides that, the sustainability assessment methodology should be introduced to additional policy sectors. That means we should conduct some extra cases in the near future. Strategic environmental assessment will be also integrated on the basis of the positive experience with the sectoral transport plan. Besides that, sustainability assessment will be included in the public procurement policy. Further policy sectors can also be converted, although it is hard to introduce the sustainability assessment to the financial and economic policy. In order to improve not only this framework, some best practice should be considered. They can be considered like SAFA, the Sustainability Assessment of Food and Agriculture System, that focus on the food and agriculture operations on the environment and people. This mechanism can be valuable reference for the Swiss Sustainability Assessment Framework improvement. The use of existing rules and regulations expertise assessment for users, while avoiding duplication by integrating existing data. Their first step is to set a good goal in the pilot phase. The practice from Research Institute of Organic Agriculture (FIBL) in Germany demonstrated the importance of determining those goals early on, as these were then able to designate the format of the report and would meet their needs. Secondly, the scope of the framework should focus on what is significant in terms of the impact. Thus, we recommend the scope of Switzerland sustainability assessment should include the complete process. That is the part of the production, processing, or distribution relevant to inputs that generate significant upstream and downstream impacts on the sustainability in the surrounding environment and in the community. If a sustainability framework is not applicable for every operation involved, the entity may choose to focus on the chain of operations as a representative sample. On the other hand, there's no one-size-fits-all scenario, but the framework should be used to boundary setting questions as the basis for determining critical issues and hotspots. On the other hand, in order to increase the transparency and credibility when during the procedure of evaluating the result, we think it can be used an accuracy score which determines the quality of the data used. The accuracy score requires an appropriate methodology of the data collection which shows the data accuracy and also published by a reliable source. There are three quality data levels. The first is the high quality data, which is the most accurate and reliable. It will be no longer than 1 to 2 years. And second is the moderate data. It will be older than 2 years but shorter than 5 years. The third is the low quality data. It will be longer than 5 years, which should be refreshed from the research. To conclude, assessing the sustainability performance of an organization is challenging, as most everything is intimately connected with everything else, directly and indirectly. No organization works wholly independently. Activities involving a complex network of value chain actors, sometimes around the whole globe, and are affected by organizations' social, environmental, and economic performance. The degree of influence and control over these value chain actors and impact can range from the minimal to significant. We now move on to the concluding statement. Corey?
Thank you, Royanne. To conclude, the Switzerland Sustainability Assessment was well ahead of its time back in 2005. Starting when sustainable development was declared to be a national objective, it was well understood that this could not be a politically isolated endeavor, and required both widespread public and private support. As Catherine mentioned, the framework is based on 3 main steps. These steps help establish a project's sustainability, understand the impact, and help achieve optimization in order to mitigate what could be irreversible environmental changes. Of course, much has been learned since this framework was initially developed. We now understand that certain steps must be taken in order to promote sustainability across the country, including determining common standards, consulting other best practices and benchmarks, and expand into other high-impact industries. Overall, it offers a strong tool to help create a more transparent, generationally considerate strategy moving into the future. Thank you for listening to our presentation. We look forward to hearing your feedback.